Welcome to Normal Islands Live. I'm Curtis Daly, and what a start of the week. We've got Helena, aka No Justice MTG, joining us tonight. I tell you what, I fucking hate Mondays, but you're making it just that little bit better.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's always a good way for people to end the worst day of the week by tuning into Turn Left, and of course with myself involved as well.
I think you're absolutely right. And we've got a cracking show coming up tonight. I'm really excited. But I just want to say though, check out the merch. Right, no, and I'm not getting paid to wear it, but Zora Mandani is in the building. Anyway, it's such a shill, exactly. I'm a shill for the Islamo jihad communists. Right, let's get on with the show then. So this is what we got coming up on tonight's show. Zach Polanski is the second most trusted on the economy. Owen Jones faces lawsuit by pro-Israel BBC editor, and the BBC head resigns after systemic bias. You can help us grow by visiting turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to help fund our work, or by becoming a YouTube member. But on to our first story. A series of polls released by Opinium has Zach Polanski the net second most trusted on the economy. Ed Davey is number one, with 32% of people trusting him to 37% distrust. Zach has 25% trust to 34% distrust. Now, looking at the rest of the figures, as you can see, it paints a slightly more complicated figure. Nigel Farage has 34% of the trust, technically putting him ahead of Zach and Davey, but 53% distrust him. So over half of the people do not trust Farage on the economy. That's not a good look for him, but Farage has used this number to push the idea that he is the most trusted. A new poll by Opinion Research finds I am the most trusted party leader to manage the economy. He's included an infographic where you can see he cynically only included the trust number, and for some reason, not including Ed Davey. He's trying to make it out that it's just him versus Labour and the Tories, with himself well ahead. Now, if he was consistent by only using the trust figure, he'd include Ed Davey behind him and Zach Polanski in front of Starmer. Look, realistically, you can't discount those who distrust you, especially when the poll shows the majority don't trust Farage. Therefore, it's important to use the plus and minus figures, which puts Ed Davey number one and Zach number two. Of course, they have a high amount of don't knows, which means I think there's a lot of space to win people over. But these kinds of polls, if you don't add these caveats, then I think you're pushing a bias and just simply spinning the numbers. But I actually think this is really significant for Zach Polanski. I mean, he's the leader of the Green Party, which the media has created a narrative that, you know, they're radically left wing and all they're going to do is spend, the bad in the economy, right? You hear this idea that, well, the Greens have nice ideas. They just don't understand how the economy works, and they're going to bankrupt us. It's a load of nonsense. So taking all that into account, I think the fact that 25% of people trust him in the economy is a huge achievement. And I honestly didn't think I'd see something like that. Unfortunately, the left are seen as bad on the economy, even though that's massively misguided. Helena, what do you make of these polls? Maybe you disagree with me, but what do you think of the polls, and was Zach on 25% of those that trust him?
I mean, I think your point there, that when you discount people who don't know and you just go by the raw figures of those who gave an affirmative answer to either side of the question, you lead to an incomplete picture of what actually would happen if that was replicated in terms of who somebody would vote for. There's a reason why Nigel Farage has the biggest trust figures and the biggest distrust figures. It's because he has the fewest don't knows, because everyone knows who he is and everyone knows his policy. It doesn't say anything about what would happen when all those don't knows knew more about Zach Polanski or not. But what is important is that people who do have an intimate understanding of politics or are intimately connected to politics show this level of trust for Zach Polanski. That is a good thing, that you can see that that's a good thing. The big question, of course, is when it comes under greater scrutiny, when the Green Party's policies are put to the public in a general election or indeed in a local election setting, when a large portion of the votes that you're going to need to be able to win will come from people who are only tangentially aware with what you are and what you do. That's going to be where the rub will lie. Now, I think it is worth saying that I think the likelihood of those don't know swinging towards distrust is probably pretty high. Not because obviously Zach is bad with the economy, I don't think he is, but what I do think is it's a reality that most people have their opinion shaped by manufactured consent.
Mm.
They'll have their opinion shaped by what the mainstream media do and don't say about Zach Polanski. And just like anybody on the left, he'll get open to the same smears that were Jeremy Corbyn, all this, oh, you can't trust the left with the economy, even though historically the worst governments we've had for managing the economy have always been conservative governments or Labour parties that have been masquerading as conservative governments. So regardless of the veracity of the claim about the left being worse on the economy, that tends to be what's the zeitgeist opinion. So I think that we probably will see Zach Polanski's trust and distrust tend towards distrust more when he is a better known political figure. But the fact that the sensible adults in the room, like Keir Starmer, are shown as being poor with the economy, likewise with the Conservative Party as well, what this definitely does say about the whole political apparatus is there is a giant distrust in the political consensus, a huge amount of distrust for the mainstream parties of government, like the ones that are seen as the natural parties of government, the big two of Labour and the Conservatives. And what this will tell you, you cannot deny, is a rejection of the neoliberal consensus that's been a part of those two parties' politics for the past 46 years. That's what you can definitely take from this, is people are sick of the status quo. They're sick of the way in which the economy is rigged for certain people and not others, and they want to reject a political class that refuses to actually change that.
Yeah, do you know what? I agree with your assessment, because I think that the don't knows are most likely going to swing to, distrust. Again, not because the Greens have a bad economic policy, but as well as I do, and people watching, the media is going to go into even more overdrive, saying, "Oh, the Greens can't do this and that. Tax the rich, they leave all that bullshit." But I think, though, for me, what's interesting is that Zach is, or has been, leader for just over a few months, maybe 6 weeks, and that he's already garnered 25%. A quarter of the people say they trust him in the economy. For me, a left-wing leader, especially a left-wing leader of the Greens and a small party, I was looking at single figures, like 6 or 7%, something you would expect. And of course, that doesn't mean that if you have low trust on one specific policy area, that's the only support you're going to get. Not true, but obviously the economy is the number one key figure when it comes to deciding elections. So I do think that the 25% is quite significant. What is included in the opinion polls is the majority want Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves to resign, which is hilarious and not surprising. But recently announced was a sort of a new soft left faction, including Louise Hay and the deputy leader. They've emerged to try and sort of steer the course. I mean, that effort is surely futile. I mean, if they manage to, I don't know, get the Labour government to scrap the two-child benefit cap and push it slightly to the soft left, on a scale of like 1 to 3, how many votes do you think they're going to get off the left? Maybe like 1-2%? What do you think?
I think it's very unlikely that they'll get the votes from the left, because I fundamentally don't think that this new grouping of soft left people will actually change anything. Because when you understand the reality of what's happened to get Keir Starmer to this position, everyone should go read Paul Holden's book, The Fraud, about that, so that we can have a fuller understanding of how there was an entire establishment coup at the top of the Labour Party to put Sir Keir Starmer, KC, former member of the Trilateral Commission, human rights lawyer, and darling of the adults in the room, grown-up, sensible wing of the politics in this country, that they deliberately tried to lie to the membership. They took donations to Labour Together that weren't reported on, even though they were told that they should be reporting these things at the time, to try and excise left-wing politics from the Labour Party and put this hard right faction in control. And that's a lot of work, that's a lot of bridges burnt, that's a lot of people, or as they described them to a journalist, fleas that they've had to shake off to get to this position in the first place. These people aren't given up without a fight. The people who have the dictatorial control of the internal party Labour processes, the people within the Politburo at the top of the Labour Party, from McSweeney and Reeves and McFadden and all that lot, they've gone through what they would describe probably as hell and high water to be able to have their hands on the levers of power within Labour and to do what they believe is the things that is necessary for Labour to be in power for the interests of both them and their backers. The reality, of course, means that regardless of how badly Labour do, because Keir Starmer's desperate to be Prime Minister, it's what he always wanted, is his dream come to life, and Morgan McSween's always wanted to have his hands on the Labour Party machinations, regardless of whether or not that means Farage as Prime Minister in 2029, regardless that means Labour councils getting wiped out in May's local elections, regardless whether that means that Labour move into third place in both Holyrood and in the Senedd in Wales, that doesn't matter, because it's the control over the internal workings of the Labour Party that matters to these people, and not the policy apparatus, not the broader utility for what happens with the country, because these are people who are fundamentally interested only in power. They're not interested in the social good on building a better country. They're there because they want to be the ones at the top and for no other reason.
I also love the email they sent out last week, which is like, I want to come back. And people like, no. Incredible stuff. Yeah, they're not going to have much success.
It's like when they lost the by-election in Runcorn and Helsby by 6 votes. And it was just like in 2022, it's like, ha ha ha, we're shaking off the fleas. In 2025, it's, oh no, we lost this election by 6 fleas.
I mean, yeah, I mean, imagine if there was a lot of volunteers there who would have potentially campaigned, could have won those 6 votes. But you know what? It's entirely their fault. Let's move on. Again, as much as I support Zach Palance in the Greens, I think that's a smaller story. The next 2 stories are far bigger, and it's, of course, to do with the BBC. Owen Jones is facing legal action by BBC editor Rafi Berg by supposedly smearing him. So back in December 2024, Jones wrote a 9,000-word report into the pro-Israel bias of the BBC on Dropsite. Now, Jones documented Rafi Berg's pro-Israel bias. His reporting often praised Israeli soldiers and settlers while leaving out facts about occupation and human rights abuses. Berg attended a pro-Israel rally during Israel's 2009 Gaza assault and later wrote a book celebrating Mossad, earning praise from Israeli officials and even a spot on Netanyahu's bookshelf. Other BBC staff have been punished for pro-Palestinian views, with colleagues accusing him of shaping coverage to favour Israel's perspective. The pro-Israel bias from the BBC is clear, and Jones did a great job documenting this. But now Berg wants to sue him. Court filings seen by the Press Association show Berg is suing for damages, claiming the article harmed his reputation and had caused him fear, anxiety, humiliation, upset, and distress. His barrister John Stables said Berg had faced an onslaught of hatred, intimidation, and threats, allegedly including death threats after publication. Following the piece, protests erupted outside BBC offices and a petition demanded Berg's suspension. Jones dismissed the claim, saying, "I strongly disagree with Mr. Berg's accusations, and I look forward to vigorously defending my reporting in court." Now, of course, look, people shouldn't be receiving, abuse and especially anti-Semitic attacks if he did get that. But these people need to be held to account. There's a genocide going on, and the BBC has given cover to them. But it's obvious that Berg is a Zionist. I mean, here's Berg admitting on video that Mossad makes him proud.
But, it's a wonderful thing to, how often do you get to be accepted into a circle of trust among the people who belonged to, some of who still work for the Mossad, and sit across the table from them and learn the most incredible stories of modus operandi and tactics and subterfuge. And we don't have the time. I'd love to spend another half an hour talking about tremendous, Danny, shut your ears for the moment, but if I use the James Bond style methods which are employed, cash hidden in chocolate boxes. I'm not sure if that was true or not, but it was told to me, or things like that, which really, as a Jewish person, an admirer of the state of Israel, then to know that these people carry out these kinds of fantastic operations. It's what makes you tremendously proud. Absolutely. Talking about it, still gives me goosebumps.
The Israel bootlickery is strong with this one. Truly embarrassing. Now, look, you've seen the litany of headlines from the BBC and their use of passive language when it comes to Palestinians. So the headline on the left is how the BBC initially reported a story of a Gaza man with Down syndrome who was left to die after being attacked by an IDF dog. It was only after complaints that they changed it to include the proper context. But even after the rewrite, Owen Jones points out that they still needed to add a flavour of pro-Israel propaganda. Eventually, the BBC decided to rewrite the story. It changed the headline to Gaza man with Down syndrome attacked by IDF dog and left to die, mother tells BBC. It also inserted 2 new paragraphs at the top of the piece informing readers that the Israeli military had admitted that a Palestinian man with Down syndrome who was attacked by an army dog in Gaza was left on his own by soldiers after his family had been ordered to leave, and that he was found dead by his family a week later. Even with the new phrasing, the story implied that the dog had attacked Bar of its own violation, not that it was under the control of IDF personnel. When it comes to the BBC covering the deaths of both Israelis and Palestinians, look at the coverage versus the actual number of deaths. So at the top of the graph, you can see the deaths are largely in equal measure in terms of coverage, right? And then there's a massive spike of coverage of killed Israelis in April, despite the fact that Palestinians have been killed in their tens of thousands at the time. This is another example of a biased BBC headline when human rights organisation Amnesty released their reports into Israel's genocide. So it says that, so the headline is Israel rejects fabricated claims of genocide. That's clearly biased. I mean, the headline should have read, Israel is committing genocide according to human rights organisation Amnesty. This is the BBC refusing to retract its claim that an Al Jazeera journalist was working with Hamas, despite it not being true. They refused to retract that. Helena, of course, we can't be too specific with the legal proceedings that will play out in court, if it gets that far. But much of the right-wing media has painted the BBC as somehow sympathetic to Hamas. I mean, this is obviously absurd.
I mean, you just have to look at the claims that they make about the BBC's supposed bias towards Hamas that comes from Zionists, that makes you realize that they're completely nonsensical. The biggest claim that I've heard from Zionists as to why the BBC is a propagandaing of Hamas. I mean, literally, they call everything Hamas. They're calling the BBC of all things Hamas. Given the stuff that you've talked about already there, seems patently ridiculous. But their central claim is that, well, the BBC should be describing Hamas as a terrorist organisation in its coverage, and it doesn't. It describes them as a militant group as part of their coverage. Because one of those is an objective fact. They are a militant group. No one on either side of the discussion would disagree with this. But the label of them being terrorists is entirely opinion-based. It's especially more important to understand this when it is also the official opinion of the British government that they're a terrorist group. The government has prescribed Hamas as a terrorist organisation, and that is not an objective fact that they have decreed. It's a fact that they have done that, but the designation is not fact. That is an opinion of the government they could revoke at any time by an act of parliament to be able to do that, to get it voted through the Commons. The BBC is a public broadcaster, not a state broadcaster. The public broadcaster has to have operational independence from the state. Otherwise, it becomes Russia Today. It becomes Press TV. If it doesn't have operational independence, then it's a state broadcaster. But it's not. It's a public broadcast. It's publicly funded, but totally independent. And therefore, what it can't do to maintain its, the sanctity of its impartiality is take the government's line on anything as rote, which it would be if it described Hamas as a terrorist organisation. I'm sure plenty of people believe that they are. This is certainly a contentious topic. But when the government of the day are officially of the opinion that they are, for the BBC that is meant to be critical of the government, critical in the broader term, not like opposed, but to take criticism and skepticism of what the government does or doesn't say to maintain its operational independence. If it were to describe Hamas unilaterally as a terrorist organisation, they would therefore be taking the government's line on something that they should be impartial on. It would be perfectly reasonable for the BBC, for example, to say the militant group Hamas, of which the government has proscribed as a terrorist organization, that's perfectly reasonable. That's describing two facts. But to say that they are terrorists is opinion. And that's not what the BBC is for. On the subject of Owen Jones, I think it'll be interesting to see how far this goes. Interesting to see what information might come out. There's a phase in these kind of litigations where both sides present a lot of their facts. So that will be the thing that will give us more information, I guess, after all this saga is completed. Depending on how far it goes, we don't know where it's supposed to go. And it's worth pointing out, you can have somebody who is in a position of power at the BBC who has certain ideological predilections, who then don't act upon it in their role as an editor or as a media presenter or whatever it is. It's perfectly acceptable to have somebody who is ideologically motivated, because lots of people are, especially people involved in news and politics, who set that aside for impartial and non-biased coverage, of which the BBC is the main purveyor of news in this country that has very strict impartiality guidelines. Perfectly reasonable to do that. Of course, the evidence will be presented and we'll end up seeing where that goes, which should be interesting.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's impossible to not be biased. We all have our own internal biases. That's fine. You can't expect anything else. But, you know, there's been people who've worked for the BBC, no longer work for them, and say, look, systematically, pro-Palestinian voices are either ignored or they're deliberately changed in a way to make it look more favourable to Israel. We pointed out some examples, and that is a drop in the ocean of the examples you can find on the BBC's bias towards Israel. I mean, you know, Berg can be a Zionist and work at the BBC as long as he upholds the upholds the impartiality. Of course, I wouldn't personally like to have a Zionist in the BBC, but like, again, you can't control other people's views, but you can be careful in making sure that certain wording isn't misplaced or a certain sentence isn't used, or you know, passive language, which, by the way, the BBC aren't the only one. The entire media do it. You know, when Russia attacks and kills innocent people, it's Russia murders innocent people, correctly says it. And then when it's a Palestinian, it's like, oh, wonder where that bomb came from. Oh, there's bullet holes in babies' foreheads, must have accidentally slipped. Like, it, you know, it's crazy. But we are going to continue talking about the BBC because we've got more stories on that one. But before we do, I just want to say that we are just 5 volunteers and we are keeping the ship going. We do this around our paid job. So our goal is to become full-time, meaning we can increase our content, be far more ambitious, and build a sustainable left-wing alternative. Your help has made so much of a difference already, from equipment to covering rallies and interviews. Your support means absolutely everything. We rely on small donations, so if you want to be part of a media organisation that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us monthly on Patreon, or there is another link for a one-time contribution. You can also become a YouTube member for 99p. Final story, and of course sticking with the BBC. The BBC Director General Tim Daly has stepped down after the corporation has been accused of bias. Tim Daly, the BBC Director General and the head of BBC News, have resigned after a former advisor to the corporation accused it of serious and systemic bias in its coverage of issues including Donald Trump, Gaza, and trans rights. In an announcement that caused shock within the corporation, Daly said his departure was entirely my decision, and it comes as the BBC prepares to apologise for the way it edited a Trump speech. Deborah Turnus, the head of BBC News, has also resigned. Sources within that department described a mood of dismay at Turnus's exit. It feels like a coup, one said. This is the result of a campaign by political enemies of the BBC. So what was the main thrust that caused this to happen? It was apparent a Donald Trump speech was edited in an episode of Panorama to mislead viewers. Michael Prescott, former independent external to the BBC, criticised the editing of Trump's speech in an edition of Panorama, which spliced together clips from an address the US president made on the 6th of January 2021. The edit suggested Trump told the crowd, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you, and we fight like hell." This is the side-by-side edit of the Trump speech.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Now, I think it's clear from that cut that it's, increased the drama and made it look more apparent that Trump was goading on the insurrection. And yes, that is a misleading edit. But the ironic thing is that it didn't need an edit to do that, as Trump did incite January the 6th. The House of Representatives committee, which included both Democrats and Republicans, showed evidence that Trump incited January the 6th. I don't need to go into the full sort of breakdown of how exactly incited January the 6th, because it's been covered for so long. But it's, of my opinion, I think it's absolutely true that he did do that. So the edit was kind of not necessary. And I think it's just not off a question that Trump is to blame. But my view is that looking at this example, it seems less of a direct decision to push propaganda, but rather a lack of editorial integrity. Everyone knows that when showing clips, you put a transition such as a white fade between cuts to signal the passage of time. You'll see that we do that when covering speeches. But this isn't the first time Panorama has been in hot water. John Ware, who directed the documentary that looked into Labour anti-Semitism, compiled one of the most obvious hit jobs the BBC has ever done, which was then exposed by the Labour files.
A description of Marks and Bird's disciplinary interview features in the documentary. The interview is conducted by Ben Westerman, a party official who is Jewish.
Ben Westerman received dozens of complaints. While interviewing one member, he was confronted with the very anti-Semitism he'd been investigating.
And we finished the interview. The person got up to leave the room and then turned back to me and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "What do you mean, where am I from?" And she said, "I asked you, where are you from?" And I said, "I'm not prepared to discuss this." And they said, "Are you from Israel?" What can you say to that? You are assumed to be in cahoots with the Israeli government. It's this obsession with that just spills over all the time into anti-Semitism.
Rika Bird speaks to Westerman at the end of the interview.
When he says, "Where are you from? Are you from Israel?" That's an absolute lie. I didn't say that.
With Westerman's permission, the two women record the interview.
The full recording shows what actually did happen.
Curious because I haven't been in the Labour Party very long and I've certainly never been to anything like this informal interview before. So I'm just curious about, what branch are you in?
I don't think that's relevant.
Okay.
I hope that's okay. I'm sorry, I don't think where I'm from is at all relevant to the investigation.
I did ask Westerman, what branch are you from? Meaning what branch of the Labour Party, because it was a Labour Party internal investigation. The word Israel never came into the exchange between me and Westerman.
Still, just can't believe it. I mean, the Labour files to me is an incredible bit of journalism. I'm sure every single person watching this have seen it. If you haven't, go back and watch it, right? I know, Jeremy Corbyn's no longer leader, but it's still integral to understand how bad the media weaponized the anti-Semitism crisis. And that is a million times worse than a bad edit of Trump. And again, I showed one clip of that Al Jazeera documentary. There's a whole host of other things, right? Look, it's true that the BBC is biased, right? It has an establishment Thatcherite outlet and obviously has a pro-Israel bias. Yet it's extremely ironic when right-wing media attacks the BBC for being biased, specifically GB News. In the last 12 months, how many unique individuals have made complaints against GB News? for which theirs was the only complaint on the programme, i.e. a complaint raised by one person, not multiple people. From the 12th of April 2023 to the 11th of April 2024, Ofcom has received 1,332 such complaints about GB News. Number two, of these complaints, how many were investigated? 7 complaints were referred for investigation. Of these, the investigations into 6 of these complaints have concluded, and 1 investigation is still ongoing. 38 complaints are currently undergoing assessment to determine if further investigation is warranted. How many were found to be in breach? Each of the 6 concluded investigations were found in breach of the Ofcom Broadcasting Code. How many were not found to be in breach? None. You literally have Nigel Farage, leader of the Reform Party, with his own show on GB News. Lee Anderson, Reform MP, he has his own show. Look, it's bad enough when you've got Ed Balls on GMB interviewing his own wife, Yvette Cooper. The point of the media is to hold power to account. But it's very funny watching right-wing figures call out BBC bias and then act like that GB News is the bastion of the truth. Lee Anderson tweeted this after Trump told people to watch GB News. There you go. Tune into GB News to get a fair and balanced view of the political world. Absolute insanity. Now, look, I have no issue with people attacking the BBC for obvious bias. We're literally doing that now. But when the right wing do it, they complain when they think it's either biased towards the left or one of their favourite politicians is attacked. Where is GB News calling out their Zionist propaganda? Funny that. Probably because of the fact that GB News is part of the corporate media who also push Zionist propaganda. Helena, before we talk about the right-wing media, what do you make of this BBC Trump episode?
I think it's a real hot water. I'll start that again. I feel like it's a hot air of nothing, really. Like, sure, you might think that it changes the complexion of the original clip if they're doing it, as you said in your piece there, to make it seem a little bit more kind of exciting for the program they're broadcasting. But the fundamental facts are as you laid out, which is that he did say many things that were judged to have been incitement towards what happened at the Capitol Hill attack. Plenty of people who were there, who were interviewed, they were arrested and interviewed about their participation in the Capitol Hill insurrection. Loads of those people also said they were doing it because Trump told them to. They were doing it on behalf of Trump. And the House of Representatives found that this was the case as well. Whereas I think you're right, it was sloppy. Certainly, it was unnecessary. There's plenty of footage that you could have used, and even like the second half of that clip, just play that second half of that clip in full, and you get the idea of what he was doing there. But it was just edited for effect with regards to the emotions of the piece, rather than them trying to frame Trump as being somehow guilty when he was really innocent. When of course the motherfucker's guilty as sin, right? It's like OJ. But the bigger issue here is that this was part of a bigger thing coming from Mr. Prescott there about a whole host of issues which the BBC has shown bias in the other direction on a lot of times on the other things. But when it comes to Trump, a bunch of his supporters and people who support Trumpism don't quite realise just how far out of left field his presidency has been in both cases. Just how far outside the realms of acceptability what he has done is. And so there will be lots of scrutiny of Trump given this radical departure from the norm. And that scrutiny is not the same as bias. Because it's interesting that in none of the actual discussion of the Panorama episode did they talk about any of the claims that were made about what Trump did, about what Trump said, about Trump's conduct in office. All it is about, well, maybe this one clip here is a little misleading. And the idea that this could lead to the resignation of somebody like Tim Davie, when he was already there as a kind of right-wing plant anyway, and the news editor, because of one poor editing from someone who's not even in control of BBC News, like one smaller editor that would have done this, it seems to me like it's really a storm in a teacup as far as I'm concerned.
I'm glad you said that, because I was obviously wondering what your response is going to be. And I'm not one to defend the BBC, but this is the thing, right? When it comes to, yourself, myself, people that turn left, we're objective and we're not partisan, right? So when the Labour Party, once in the blue moon, does something not too bad, we'll say that's not bad, but also we're generally quite critical of Labour. We're not partisan as in, like, we love Labour for being the red team or we hate them for being the red team, which is what you see from the right. And when it comes to the BBC, again, I think it used to be an institution which had some kind of respect. Now it's atrocious, although their culture stuff I still really enjoy. But if they're gonna, if I feel like they're warrant of sort of defending, then I'm going to do that. And I absolutely agree. Like, sure, that clip being stitched together can be misleading, right? I do think that's misleading. But the idea that this is like a resignation matter, or that this is a huge propaganda machine, it's insane to me, because the fact is, as I said before, when you're editing, right, when you do jump cuts on speeches, for example, you put in a white fade to show the passage of time, right? The idea that just because you didn't put a white transition in means the difference between probably not going to cause a storm and causes a huge storm, that to me feels like it's overblown, right? Now, Tim Daly should resign, but he should resign over the fact that the BBC, once again, has given cover to a literal genocide. There are so many disgusting things that the BBC has given cover to or been biased of, which I think is appalling. To me, that would be a resignation offence, right? But this, to me, is giving in to the right-wing crybaby machine. Because just as that panorama clip of the Labour anti-Semitism scandal, right? You literally had that Westerman figure, I forgot his first name actually, literally lied about two Jewish left-wingers saying that, are you from Israel? And John Ware platformed that along with a whole host of other bullshit in the BBC Panorama documentary. No one said anything because it was against the left. But, poor Trump is criticised or not seen very good. And, the whole establishment or right-wing establishment descends onto them. And again, I think you're absolutely right. Objective reporting means calling bullshit when something's bullshit, right? And you hear from, again, like GB News and the right-wing media, the media's so unfair on Donald Trump, it's not fair. Yes, okay, but that is true. I would say the media's largely critical of Trump, but the guy, in my opinion, is a fucking fascist. Like, there has to be an acceptable window where you start to go, do you know what? He should be criticised, because my big issue with the corporate media and the BBC is the false balance. It's like, we need to be balanced just for the sake of balance. You wouldn't, if it's raining outside, you wouldn't bring someone into the panel and say, well, it's not raining outside. We're being balanced, yeah, but it's not objective. So if Trump has bad coverage, it's just objective that he's very, very bad. I do want to ask about that. Like, what do you make of GB News and the right-wing outlets who are going after the BBC, and also the people that say, it has a left-wing bias?
I mean, there's so much to unpack here. There's a huge amount to unpack here. Now, when it comes to the issue of the BBC's bias institutionally, you said you don't want to defend the BBC. I will defend the BBC as an institution. I can criticise the way that it functions, but I think having the BBC as an institution is incredibly important. It's incredibly important, right? So if you look at the news sites people most go to in the United States, top of the pile is Fox News at about 25%, because every media organization in the United States, hyper-partisan. There is no public broadcaster. It's all done by funding or ideological alignment, and then people attach themselves to that kind of news output. In the UK, the BBC is the most watched when it comes to news, and it's 70%. That's an incredibly normalizing factor in terms of our media diet in this country that at least allows there to be some level of normalcy, somewhere where there should be objective, impartial reporting that people can go to, and people have historically gone to, and in lots of cases they've done a good job on. There are obviously lots of things we can criticize, and that's what the impartiality clause is there for. But that's a normalizing factor that is not the case in the United States. The reason why the right-wing media want to get rid of the BBC, and this is why these attacks keep coming from the right-wing media, from the Telegraph and GB News. These are things that are part of the Paul Marshall extended universe of right-wing grift machines. Is because they don't want to have views that they disagreed with platformed in the same way. So when you look at a corporate-funded news organization, whether it's liberal or conservative, because of course what it never is socialist, because why would corporations fund something that is opposed to corporations? Whether it's liberal or conservative, there is that implicit pro-capital bias. That shouldn't be the same in the BBC. Now, it does have its bias problems. I will go into that in a second. But the right wing are constantly engaging in these attacks because of, first of all, their desire to have all media done for money, for all media to go through the lens of corporate ownership and therefore all have pro-corporate bias. Second of all, it's because fundamentally a lot of conservatives, a lot of right-wingers just are not very good at media literacy. They will look at the BBC not agreeing with their view specifically and think that means that's a bias rather than a level of impartiality that doesn't specifically mollycoddle their particular positions. We saw this just last week as well. I'll get another BBC scandal story where one of their news presenters and one of their anchors, Martine Croxall, she was brought up as having failed impartiality because during a segment on climate change and its effects, she read out a quote from a scientist about how this would impact individuals, and that quote used the term pregnant people. And she put out a weird facial expression and edited that to say pregnant women, because in TERF minds, women aren't people. So describing pregnant people feels wrong to them, even though it's an inclusive phrase that would include women, even if you didn't believe that trans men were men, for example. But I digress. Either way, people are getting mad at the BBC for correctly upholding their impartiality clause because it doesn't confirm their worldview. Because they actually don't want an impartial BBC. They want a BBC that's partial to them. Because the reality is also true when it came to Martine Croxall, is if it was the other way around, and she had said to change it to pregnant people rather than pregnant women with a smirk, that would also not be impartiality because it was reading a quote from somebody else. She's not allowed to do this in either direction, but they're getting mad because she's not doing it in the way that is of their interest. And that was something else was included from that Mark Prescott piece where he was critical of the BBC, is that they're too pro-trans, if you can imagine such a thing. Because I've personally never been experienced pretty much a lot of pro-trans reporting from the BBC. That's a huge issue. So there's just a huge media bias problem when it comes to the right wing. When it comes to the actual institutional bias of the BBC, and I think there is a bias, but it's not biased because it's the BBC. It's not biased because it's a public broadcaster. It's not biased because of its impartiality clause. It's biased because it is an institution that includes journalists from the UK. If you look at breakdown by our population in terms of profession and then broken down by whether they went to state or private school, the broader population is 93% state educated and 7% private educated. You look at our journalists, they are 52% privately educated. The majority of ours are privately educated, despite them making a tiny proportion of the UK public. And so, having gone through the same schooling system, loads of them have gone to Oxford and Cambridge, right, to institutions that perpetuate similar ideas. They will move from institution to institution. Like Allegra Stratton's worked for BBC ITV. She was a press officer for Boris Johnson at one point as well, famously caught up in the Partygate scandal. And they will take their biases with them wherever they go. Whatever they have learned as received wisdom in the private education system, in the private school system, in the Oxbridge system, right? They will carry those unwritten assumptions with them wherever they go within our media ecosystem. For example, there was an internal report the BBC did on themselves, which you wouldn't have gotten if it was a partisan outlet. The BBC actually has these clauses to enforce impartiality, to check its own biases, to try and be able to make its coverage better. It doesn't do a good job all the time, and I think it's worth to be critical, especially in the case of things like Israel-Palestine. But in this specific case, it was about their economics coverage, and they found that there was systemic bias in their reporting about economics, not because anyone was trying to, but because their own reporters didn't know enough about economics, that they were taking positions such as debt is always bad, or public spending reductions are always bad, as being prima facie correct positions when that isn't necessarily true in either of those cases. It's just that's what they learned from doing PPE or Oxford, whatever it is, and they carried those biases with them. If we really want to solve structural problems in our media reporting in this country, first of all, cut the corporate funding. Second of all, democratize the BBC, make it more accountable to the people broadly rather than being at arm's length of the public. I think that'd be a good way of injecting more public consent and public involvement in the BBC so that people have an active role in shaping the news coverage that's funded on their behalf through public money. And another part of that is just have better journalists with a more diverse set of backgrounds and if you might not have that same level of manufactured consent. Because you've got to remember, as Chomsky put to Andrew Marr, these people almost certainly all believe that everything that they're saying is true and they're not ideologically inclined in the first place. But if they didn't have those same ideological inclinations in terms of the corporate media, they wouldn't have been hired because they're not pushing the right position. And in terms of the BBC and our public media, they wouldn't have been part of that media ecosystem in the first place to move from another organisation to the BBC and vice versa. It's a really, really difficult situation that we're in with the BBC because it has such a high level to which that it expects impartiality. The people can fall foul of this very, very easily. And it sometimes goes too far. Like you look at Gary Lineker, who in his own personal capacity was saying things about Israel-Palestine that caused him to have to leave the organisation, which was nothing to do with what happened, anything on the air. Unlike Martin Croxall, who's been even more ideologically inclined in terms of the discussion than Gary Lineker was, but she did it in her role as a BBC anchor, not in a private capacity as a citizen on Twitter. And the fact that these things don't even get brought up, I find very, very frustrating, because it's good to have public media. It is good to have publicly funded media. It's good to have the enshrined impartiality. But what we can do, what we always must be, is critical of how that has gone. So anyone wants to criticise the jump cut or whatever it is from Panorama, or the Labour Files investigations into Panorama, or whatever is happening in terms of their broader coverage, that criticism is welcome. But it shouldn't be used as a move to try and demolish and dismantle the BBC as an institution. It's criticism to make the BBC better and hold it to the principles it was founded upon. That's what the reality is here. And that's why I differ from a Nigel Farage. It's why I would differ from a Paul Marshall and a GB News, is that I firmly believe in the public body representing itself through public broadcasting, and these people want that torn down because it is a benchmark against their right-wing corporatist propaganda.
I mean, that was superbly put. And by the way, I just want to clarify, when I said I don't want to defend the BBC, I hate the BBC editorial as it is now. I do believe in a public institution. And for those that are watching, I recommend reads Tom Mills's book on the BBC. It's called The Myth of the Public Broadcast Institution, but it's a really good book. And I've spoken to Tom Mills, and he said, look, I believe in the public institution. We need to democratize it. Because, Helena, where you're absolutely right, in which you're not going to get this analysis, right? No one's going to get your expert analysis anywhere else on Twitter or right-wing media. The problem is journalism. The problem is elitism, and it's probably because they all go to private schools. I mean, I remember when we were talking about the economics myths that the BBC was pushing out, was when Laura Koonsberg was saying, we've maxed out the credit card. Again, it's obviously not deliberate propaganda. And getting rid of the BBC just means you have the entirety of the media basically being corporate owned. Besides Channel 4, but guess what? The right wing have been gunning after that as well. So I absolutely agree. I mean, no one is immune from propaganda, though. I mean, and I've seen it on Twitter, and I've got ratioed for this take on Twitter, which is wild to me. It shows that you're right. No one has media literacy, right? If you think ditching the BBC to watch another outlet, such as GB News, right? You're not freeing yourself from propaganda or bias. You're just getting a different flavour of bias. The point, right, is to be a critical thinker. Right? Taking news from multiple sources, never treating one specific outlet as the truth, right? Don't do that. When everyone says, I watch this for the truth, they're conspiracy loons, right? Because bias does exist everywhere. But you look at multiple different outlets, you collect the information, and use your own brain to work out what's true, right? People who only watch one outlet and then call it the truth are not seeing the truth. They are being propagandized. I think let's bring in Sarah then for the comments. It's been a fantastic show. We've had nearly 300 people watching. And I'm interested to see your comments. How are we, Sarah?
Well, I think at the very least, we are open in the fact that we're ideological, right? It's called a media for socialism. Like, we're not out here pretending that what we're saying is done with total kind of impartiality, because we are not a public broadcast. We have no desire to be. We're an independent outlet, but that's different between being partisan. And again, like when it comes to media bias, like story selection is a big thing. The right wing just they fail to realize is important. They go, well, I can't believe that they're talking about XYZ thing. Well, because people are interested in it. It's like story selection is about the biases of the people deciding what's news or not. And it's just, I think every conservative could just do with like critical thinking and a media training. Because
if people had critical thinking in this country and the world would be an entirely different state. And the things like with GB News, for example, I go on GB News, right? I despise it because the views they push. But obviously a lot of it is that they're biased, and I don't think they really hide that. The problem is when they do certain editorials, such as the Centre for Migration Control, where they pump out numbers, which they say it's the truth, but actually the I think the head think tank of the Centre for Migration Control is a reform activist. Right? They do actually push lies too, but like I'm not as bothered about a right-wing outlet saying we're right-wing and being right-wing, just as how, yeah, we're a media for socialism, we're left-wing. Sarah, people couldn't hear you before, but you should now be working. Yeah. You just want it in the layer. Yeah. Thank you. Apparently we can't, they're saying they can't hear you. They should be. It didn't change. Oh god, wait a second. This is a bloody kerfuffle, wasn't it? There we go. Right, I'm so sorry. People are accusing me of sexism for silencing women's voices.
Yeah.
I'm not beating those allegations when you've been speaking for ages. And not, hey, I'm not a sexist. It was a tech error. You should be able to hear Sarah now.
Can you guys hear me?
What's funny is everyone could hear her on my channel because obviously I'm getting the offstage feeds.
Yeah.
Oh my god! Hey guys, I've missed you all. I even put it on my, because I watch from my phone just as an extra viewer because I'm a beg. But I actually said they hate me, as in turn left. But yeah, I was just saying thanks, James. We see you every week, just supporting as per usual. And then Stephanie became a member. Thank you so much, Stephanie. We hope you stick around. And Jean Scott Barr as well. Wonderful for becoming a member. Right, let's go to some soup. Oh, I'm sorry. And Jim Speak. Jim spoke. Jim gifted. Thank you so much, Jim. It's really kind of you. Right, let's go to super chats and we can just start there. David Bowater said, should Zach go after Farage and call out his bullshit economic policies? And should Zach go after Ed Davey for his role in and continued support for austerity? What do you think?
1,000,000% yes. The short memory of Ed Davey and the Lib Dems frustrates me. He's just a kind liberal. This fucker was in government with austerity. The Lib Dems are a bunch of piss diamonds.
I mean, that's true. They are piss diamonds. I think both halves of these are correct. I mean, Zach has already gone after Reform UK's economic policy. He was on Question Time and literally said that Reform UK are just following the same Thatcherite playbook that's destroyed the countries that the Tories did. We need to hear more of that from Zach. Speak to the positions that the kind of red wall voters hold about Thatcher economics and what that did to those communities in terms of losing jobs, etc. And when it comes to Ed Davey, I think we have heard a couple of things like that from Zach, but we need to be going super hard. We need to go super hard on the Lib Dems because the Lib Dems are, taking a good 20% of the vote of the under 30s in this country, of between 15 and 20%, and those are votes that are totally fucking unearned. Completely unearned, right?
100%.
Like the whole Lib Dem voter base, is a coalition of people who earn over £100,000 a year or more, which is statistically like the group of the country that have the highest propensity to vote Lib Dem, are really high earners, and young people who didn't live through the coalition government. And I think that there needs to be a lot of a lesson for these people to understand that so much of the shit that they're dealing with as young people right now is directly down to the kind of budgets that were passed by the Liberal Democrats when they're in coalition with the Conservative government. So many issues are down to this orange book view of the world, of which Ed Davey wrote a fucking chapter on. Like, that man is a Thatcherite. He is a right-winger in terms of the economy. That's why he was very happy to go on Times Radio and start spouting shit about about fraud in the PIP system and the necessity of reductions on welfare spending. And I'm just like, how is he any different to the Conservatives or Labour at this point? Especially when the Lib Dems don't even vote to support what few good policies that the Labour government have been putting through. Like, they abstained on the workers' rights bill. They didn't vote for taxes on private schools. They voted against increases on inheritance tax on farmland. So many things that were passed by Labour to even if it was just for a small extent to level the playing field between lower and upper classes. And because these people represent rich people, they voted against or voted to abstain. They're not progressive. They're not left-wing. They're not in any way anything other than just a neoliberal outlet that maybe has some socially progressive opinions. They don't deserve the votes of anyone who was born after the year of 1992.
I also don't think they're even that socially progressive, because there was a recent, I think, motion at the Lib Dems which was extremely transphobic, and it basically upheld what the Supreme Court said in their own policy making. I think it was like only cis people can be part of certain groups. Like, obviously, I don't know exactly what it was. Go and Google it. But what I do know is there was something that was passed at the Lib Dem conference, or maybe not conference, but subsequent from then, which was really transphobic. It wasn't too long ago that they had a homophobic leader as well. So even the idea that they're like, they're liberal though. I mean, at least they're kind to queer people. They're fucking not, right? They're not as socially right wing as the Conservatives, of course, but I mean, you want to meet halfway on this sort of shit, right? You're either an ally or you're not. It's very clear. You can't be fucking half an ally, can you? You're either an ally or not.
Yeah, in the chat, someone's saying, let's be socially progressive, but also make people use food banks, the Lib Dem position. It's so true, so true. I mean, it's like you look at the social ills and you go, well, the results are bad, but the causes are very, very good.
Basically, yeah.
And David sent another £10.
Oh, wow, thank you,
Bowwater. Knowing how bad weak Labour is, where do you think they'll get the next Director General from? This is for your last story. Former Murdoch employee, GBBs, or even someone who the US Republicans want?
I mean, that's a really interesting part of this. I think
we've got a frozen Helena. I didn't Starmer employ someone who used to work for the Sun? So the idea that they could probably get someone in who's not as bad, I wouldn't count on it. Like I could absolutely see a former Murdoch employee get involved. That's a shame. I don't know if the internet or maybe her computer's crashed.
No, it's probably the internet. I was interested to hear Helena's take.
Why don't let's go on to the next question and maybe just bring it back up when she
we'll just go
gets
to this
back.
One, it's about you, Curtis Daly MP. He's got his own show.
I'll never be an MP. I can tell right now, I'm never ever going to do that. I'd rather shit in my hands and clap.
Yeah, I bet. We'll go to this one then, which was at the start. And it was Ollie Carpenter saying, "Oh, the irony of picking out favourable bits of polling information regarding trust." And what I noticed is that so a lot of people, when they're viewing that graphic, the numbers aren't actually that insanely different between him, the Tories and Labour, but the way he made Reform look so astronomical by having the bar go way higher than Kemi and Keir meant that to anyone who's looking at that really quickly, they'll be like, oh my god, like Reform are clearly leading when it comes to trust, when leading on economics and stuff. So I don't know, like I think because a lot of people do just glance, I don't think people actually study. It's kind of like the stat where, what is it? I can't remember.
Well, it looks like you talk about the Lib Dem charts.
No, the one that Farage did.
Yeah, but like it reminds me of at the last election, it was like only the Lib Dems can win here.
Yes. yeah.
What is it? Like they were like 1% ahead. It was like
yeah,
absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, but funny. I think it's almost like that's just like the way that you could easily manipulate people, though, because it's like that stat where a certain percentage is only going to read the headline of a newspaper article, and then less than like 20% will actually read the whole article, but majority of people just look at the headline. So a lot of people just look at those bars and say, yeah, well, Reform are doing brilliantly. So I have nothing to really research now. Like, Reform are doing great. Like, so it's, I don't know, it's kind of just very surface level, very, very quick manipulation. And this is actually for Helena, but she's not here. Definitely something Helena schools people on. The right can't manage the economy and never could.
Yeah.
And I do want Helena to see that. And this one's quite interesting. Gunt said, I've not seen the Green deputies interviewed. Are they any good under pressure? Polanski must be knackered doing all the media. What do you think, Curtis?
Well, what I would say is that our very own Callum Taylor interviewed every single deputy leader before the leadership race. Of course, they were questions based on them running for deputy leadership, but right on this channel, every single deputy leader was interviewed. So if you want to go and watch that, then you'll probably get a better idea about who they are. Because what was quite frustrating is there was too many deputy leadership candidates. I couldn't tell who I knew the famous ones, if you want to call it that, like Mothin Ali, Frank, I forget his last name. I'm so sorry. Rachel Millward. They were the sort of the ones who had the most sort of public face. But yeah, go watch those interviews.
Absolutely. There's another. So Ian did a series of comments that I found quite interesting. I'm trying to speak up, so sorry, Curtis, if I'm screaming in your ear. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me.
Make up for the fact that you were quiet for like 2 minutes.
Yeah, literally. So I have to scream. But Ian said, and it kind of was going off. It's interesting because Ian put this comment way before Helena had said what she had said and what you had said as well. And he had said, so I think the BBC needs to be protected, supported, and well governed to ensure it can shine a light on the truth, no matter who is at fault. I'd be happy to pay the license fee for that. It was actually another comment. Hold on. This one, and I feel like the BBC is the only major broadcaster that's expected to uphold the highest standards. As such, it's the one we should be trying to help and remediate and restore to that position. Do you agree with that? That is, we need to try and help the BBC get back into a position where they are trusted as an institution?
So the big issue is whether they can be trusted again, given that there has been particular campaigns against the BBC, as Helena sort of pointed out, and the right wing definitely have campaigned against it. So politically, can they get the trust back? I'm not sure. We don't want to go back to what they were before, though, because it was never a perfect institution. It used to be far better than what it is today. But as Helena said, and as, again, like if you read Tom Mills, you read the Media Reform Coalition, you must check them out. They're calling for the democratization of the BBC. So rather than going back to something which, okay, it wasn't as bad, look forward, because the media is the biggest obstacle to change in this country. The reason why me and you are sat here right now is because we're frustrated with the corporate media. We wouldn't have to do this if we had a media that was actually, I thought, was fair, balanced, not just that, but also gave voices to those without power. So it's about changing the entire media landscape. Starts with the BBC, democratise it, but also we got to absolutely destroy the corporate media. No billionaire or multimillionaire should own a media platform. It should not happen. And that's where, the BBC will always be better in some regard than the corporate media, because it does have a level of accountability, whereas the corporate media has absolutely zero accountability.
Really good point. And this one, there's another one by Ian. Sorry, Ian. This one. So if it has institutional bias, in what direction? Then it just needs better governance to address that. GB News has a far worse institutional bias. Let's fix that first. And this one got a little bit of pushback, actually, from, I think, Edward, just saying that, well, GB News is kind of like, I don't want to misquote Edward, but basically saying that GB News is something that is quite surface level, whereas the BBC, I think, is something that needs to be addressed first. So I don't know. Like, what do you think on that?
Well, you can't fix the GB News bias because it's owned by Paul Marshall, who is a far right lunatic who cares about pushing. Hey, she's back. Cares about pushing the propaganda of the wealthy, right? Someone like GB News is like non-reformable. You can't do that, whereas the BBC is. So it's not about let's fix institutional bias with GB News first. No, you need to destroy the corporate media. Just don't have a corporate media, and obviously try and make the BBC better. Your internet went out. Oh, what a shame, but you are back. Oh, what? My light's going everywhere.
Yeah, I am now back. Sorry about that. Brief
That's all right.
This is the question. This is the question that you were answering, Helena, before you got cut off. But knowing how bad and weak Labour is, where do you think they'll get the next Director General from?
Well, I mean, part of the reason why we're having this discussion is because the Trump administration is so they're so happy to use international pressure to be able to get what they want in other countries, right? Like using international trade and tariffs and things like that to strong arm other countries into doing what they want to do. You saw them with their reaction to the conviction of Bolsonaro in Brazil, for example. Say, well, we'll put loads of tariffs on you if you don't do what we want. Nigel Farage knows this. He went to the US Congress and testified and said that Trump should literally use tariffs against this government to try and get positions that he wanted in terms of free speech protections, literally asking foreign governments to tariff us, our country, to try and get his favourable positions passed, right? And the Labour Party have been very well known to try and curry favour with the Trump administration, to capitulate on those issues because they're desperate for a good trade deal, for example. So they'll probably appoint somebody who's somewhat sympathetic to Trump because they don't want to have to deal with any repercussions that comes from the Trump administration in terms of their political relationship if they don't. Again, they are pathetic. They're incredibly pathetic, the Labour Party, in their ability to be pushed around, and that's probably what we'll see with the replacement for Tim Davey. Because, I mean, I've been hoping for this guy to resign for a long time. Hopefully Robbie Gibbs soon will follow. But the fact that we have a party of government right now, not only who are happy to lace the boots of the Trump administration, who are advised by somebody in terms of Blue Labour's Maurice Glassman, who's an outspoken pro-Trump politician as a member of the House of Lords, who is also just as reactionary and nasty as the Trump administration is. So I don't have any confidence that Labour will replace this with anyone other than a sycophant at this point.
I was just saying as well before you got cut off, or the internet took you, or someone in chat said Paul Mason kidnapped you. Is that one of Starmer's team? They hired an ex-Sun journalist. I think it was for a comms advisor. So I would not be surprised if they pull someone from the Murdoch media. There's no one too low for Starmer, it seems. It should be Piers Morgan. No, God no.
I think we just got a few more. I think this is the final one. Where is it? Oh, yeah, Blakeology. There just can't be unbiased journalism whilst capitalism exists. There are massive incentives for corruption, and clickbait, ragebait gets more money than factual reporting. What do you guys think on that?
I mean, there is certainly a big case of this. Obviously, the BBC doesn't have to worry about this. That's why public media is so important, because the funding doesn't come from advertising, it doesn't come from clicks, it doesn't come from engagement, it comes from the public, reporting in the public interest. That's a funding model that precludes the excesses of capitalism from the incentives behind what does and doesn't get reported on. Like I was talking about story selection earlier on. Well, capitalism necessitates story selection that maximizes AdSense revenue by getting as many eyeballs onto the media as possible. So it no longer becomes all about what, where, when, how, why, and becomes more about, whoa, look at what just happened. And it will generate clickbait headlines that are potentially misleading. And that's been seen all across the corporate media. And you and I will both know this, Curtis, because when we're titling videos, when we're making thumbnails, right, we're always trying to make it as provocative as possible, because that's what gets people to click on the video. It doesn't matter whether the content of the video itself is high or low quality. Of course, with both of us, I'm sure it's very, very high quality.
We know it is high quality, yeah.
But in the broader media ecosystem, no matter what you're making videos for on YouTube, whatever you're doing for your articles online, If you need, it doesn't matter how good or bad it is, if you want people to engage with it, they have to click on it first. That means having thumbnails and titles and news headlines that catch people's attentions and get them to want to read more, to click on it, so that you can get their eyeballs on that AdSense revenue. Which is why I support subscription-based journalism that doesn't rely on such a thing, doesn't rely on that. Like, for example, I may not be politically in agreement with everything, certainly not with Peter Jukes, who is the founder of this, but Byline Times does not take any ad money at all and is entirely funded by donations, so they don't have to worry about whether or not people click on the headline or not, so they can be a little bit less sensationalist in their reporting. The same is not true for people like The Telegraph, for example, and well, it's certainly not true for GB News, because they're not even making any money. They make continual losses. But of course, as far as people like Paul Marshall are concerned, this is an ideological loss leader. They know that they'll make more money down the line by getting a deregulated economy, which is what right-wingers always want. And if they have to waste money now spreading obviously pro-corporate slop, but also endless cultural bullshit that distracts people from the real issues of inequality and the structural inequalities of capitalism and the power of the corporations, then they'll be able to reap the dividends in terms of pro-corporate policy when their right-wing candidates get elected into government. That's the role of corporate media, especially when it's so ideologically motivated by, well, quite frankly, cranks like Paul Marshall.
I mean, you're definitely right in terms of the funding model for the BBC not being so exposed to these excesses of capitalism, but I still think they are, because the corporate media absolutely do sway the BBC. I think when it comes to the corporate media getting more attention and clicks and ads and stuff, I think you could eventually see the BBC act in that way anyway, to try and be relevant and keep up. You also have the newspaper review shows. You've also got social media and Twitter, for example. Twitter does have a large impact on journalists and the media. So I do think actually the excesses of capitalism, whilst not directly influence the BBC in terms of like the way it's funded, I think external pressures of the corporate media does do that. Of course,
that's true.
Not to the extent, obviously, of what the current corporate media setup is.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Really, really great analysis. That's pretty much it, guys. Honestly, loved
Really good
it.
show for a Monday.
Really
Not that
great
Mondays are
bloody
bad
show.
shows, but like, you know,
Mondays are just terrible days, because it just reminds me of how much tired I am. But no, you guys, honestly, you've put life back into me, so I'm grateful. Really nice though. Thank you.
before we go to the end bit, are you
Oops.
continuing to stream, Helena?
No, my stream cut out when the internet did.
Okay.
So
All right.
I might come and stream later. Might give myself an hour, have some food, and then come back. Basically, it depends if I can find something to talk about, because I feel like we've talked about all the stories I want to talk about today.
Whoops.
I don't think there's much in the news other than that, really. So maybe I'll just come back tomorrow and do it and stream tomorrow instead.
Okay.
People have got their fill of me. Please enjoy the scraps that I have deigned to offer.
We could never get sick of you.
Well,
bye, guys.
Regardless if Helena streams or not tonight, please go follow her. She's at No Justice MTG on all the platforms, including obviously YouTube, Twitch, Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Did I miss any?
No, I don't think so.
And also Threads. Something I'm definitely not going to get on. Also, become a YouTube member to her channel too. Help fund her work too, because we absolutely
cheaper than
need
a can
it.
of Red Stripe. Cheaper than a can of Red Stripe.
Cheaper than a can of Red Stripe. You can subscribe to No Justice MTG, because she's a very big, very, very important addition to the political commentariat in this country. I personally think one of the best British political commentariats that exists. Right, certainly better than much the BBC.
I couldn't say fairer than that myself.
But that is, of course, all we have time for. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. It's been a fantastic show. We've got really high viewers today. Of course, I want to thank Helena for joining me. As always, remember to please like the stream. And if you're not a subscriber, hit that button. If you want us to grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you could become a YouTube member for 99p. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.